The strangest thing about attending your own funeral is realizing nobody there knows you are still alive. That was the first thought that slammed into my head as I opened my eyes to a familiar white ceiling instead of the endless gray sky I remembered. My heart pounded against my ribs while I lay perfectly still, listening to the gentle chirping of birds outside an open window. There were no mournful bells, no silent crowd dressed in black, no polished coffin surrounded by white lilies. Just warm sunlight spilling across a wooden floor and a faint breeze carrying the scent of blooming jasmine into a quiet dorm room. I blinked twice, then sat up so quickly that my blanket wrapped itself around my legs and nearly sent me face first onto the floor. Fantastic, I muttered while untangling myself. If destiny does not kill me, gravity apparently volunteered. The room was small but elegant, decorated with dark oak furniture, neatly stacked textbooks, and a Navy Academy uniform hanging beside the closet. Everything looked exactly the way I remembered from the novel I had once stayed awake reading until 3 a.m. The realization hit me all at once. Evercrest Academy, the world's most prestigious magic school, home to legendary heroes, impossible adventures, dramatic speeches, and a truly unreasonable number of staircases. More importantly, it was also home to Noah Carter, the forgettable supporting character who survived exactly long enough to remind readers that not everyone received a happy ending. Except I was Noah Carter now. I stumbled toward the mirror above the dresser and froze. A young man with soft dark hair, pale skin, and tired blue-gray eyes stared back at me. Definitely not my old face. Definitely the face described in Chapter 6, right before Noah quietly disappeared from the story forever. No, I whispered to my reflection. Absolutely not. I refuse. My reflection, rather unhelpfully, refused with me. I pressed both hands against the edge of the dresser and tried to breathe. This was impossible. People were not supposed to wake up inside fantasy novels, especially not after remembering their own funeral. Yet every detail felt painfully real. The polished wood beneath my fingertips, the distant laughter drifting across the academy grounds. Even the cool morning air brushing against my sleeves felt impossible to dismiss as a dream. My eyes wandered toward the academy calendar hanging beside the window. Orientation day, 3 years before Noah's death. My pulse slowed just enough for rational thought to return. 3 years. I had 3 years to avoid every disaster, every prophecy, every heroic adventure, and most importantly, every single main character. That sounded surprisingly manageable. I did not need glory. I did not need magical powers beyond passing my exams. I certainly did not need complicated romances involving legendary heroes with tragic backstories and suspiciously perfect hair. I wanted peaceful classes, quiet afternoons in the library, decent coffee, and perhaps one close friend who never accidentally unleashed ancient curses. That was all. Live quietly. I told myself with complete sincerity. Graduate. Leave. Grow flowers somewhere nobody has ever heard the word destiny. It was the greatest survival plan ever created, which was probably why it lasted less than 30 seconds. A framed photograph resting on the desk suddenly shimmered beneath the morning sunlight. I frowned and picked it up. At first it showed an ordinary academy graduation ceremony. Then the image slowly changed before my eyes. Students faded away one by one until only 5 figures remained. 4 smiling heroes stood together beneath the academy gates, and right in the middle, smiling beside them as though he had always belonged there, was me. The photograph slipped from my fingers and landed softly on the desk, but the image refused to return to normal. 4 heroes continued smiling beside me as though the picture had always been taken that way. I stared at it for a full minute before pointing an accusing finger at the frame. Absolutely not, I informed it. Whoever edited this timeline has a terrible sense of humor. The photograph, rather disappointingly, offered no explanation. I took one slow breath, then another. Panic would accomplish nothing. I still remembered the original story almost chapter by chapter, which meant I held one enormous advantage. I knew exactly where every important hero would be during orientation. More importantly, I knew exactly how to avoid them. Lucas Ashford would arrive through the Eastern Academy gate after finishing his morning sword practice. Ethan Brooks would spend his free time volunteering in the healing greenhouse before classes began. Damien Cole always visited the observatory tower to sketch magical constellations whenever he felt nervous. Julian Hayes practically lived inside the restricted library. Perfect. I would simply choose none of those places. It was the kind of flawless strategy people admired in survival stories. I even wrote it down in a small notebook just to make it feel official. Rule number 1. Never cross paths with a hero. Rule number 2. Never attract unnecessary attention. Rule number 3. If destiny appears, politely walk in the opposite direction. Feeling strangely proud of myself, I changed into the academy uniform, grabbed my schedule, and slipped quietly out of the dormitory before most students had finished breakfast. The academy grounds were breathtaking in the soft morning light. White marble buildings reflected the golden sunrise while crystal leaves shimmered gently above peaceful stone pathways. Young magicians hurried between classrooms carrying glowing books and enchanted satchels. Somewhere nearby, a fountain sang with softly flowing magical water. It was exactly the peaceful beginning I had hoped for. I deliberately turned away from the crowded central courtyard and followed a narrow garden path hidden behind rows of flowering hedges. See, I whispered to myself with growing confidence. Peaceful life. Easy. At that exact moment, someone rounded the corner carrying an enormous stack of books so tall that his face was completely hidden. We both stopped. I stepped left. He stepped left. I stepped right. He stepped right. We repeated the awkward dance 3 more times before I sighed dramatically and backed into the grass to let him pass. Please, I said with an awkward smile. Go ahead. The student thanked me and hurried away without ever seeing my face. Success. I had avoided. Another unnecessary interaction. Feeling victorious over this remarkably small accomplishment, I continued deeper into the gardens until I reached a quiet stone bridge overlooking a narrow stream. There was nobody nearby. Birds rested among crystal branches. Even the wind seemed determined not to disturb the silence. Then the academy bell rang unexpectedly. Once, twice, 3 times. My smile slowly faded. That was wrong. Orientation day only required 1 bell. 3 bells signaled an emergency gathering, and according to the novel, the first emergency would not happen until nearly 2 months later. Students all around the gardens froze in confusion. A low murmur spread across the campus. Before anyone could react, a clear male voice echoed from somewhere beyond the bridge. There you are. My heart dropped. I knew that calm, confident voice without ever hearing it before. Slowly, almost afraid to confirm my own suspicion, I turned toward the sound. Standing beneath the shade of a crystal tree with the morning sunlight behind him was Lucas Ashford, and instead of looking surprised to find me there, he smiled as though he had been searching for me all along. Lucas Ashford smiled with the quiet confidence of someone greeting an old friend instead of a complete stranger. That single detail bothered me more than the unexpected academy bells. According to the novel, this was impossible. We were not supposed to meet until halfway through the 2nd semester, and even then our conversation lasted exactly 23 words before both of us walked in opposite directions forever. Apparently fate had decided to rewrite the script without asking my permission. Good morning, Lucas said, his calm voice carrying easily over the gentle sound of the stream beneath the bridge. He wore the immaculate white and navy academy uniform reserved for top-ranked students, though there was nothing arrogant about the way he stood. If anything, he looked strangely relieved. I have been looking for you. My brain immediately rejected that sentence. Respectfully, I replied, pointing at myself just to eliminate any possible misunderstanding. I think you have mistaken me for someone significantly more interesting. Lucas let out a quiet laugh that sounded natural rather than forced. I was afraid you would say that. Wonderful. Now he was predicting my dialogue too. Have we met before? He asked. No. I answered so quickly that even I did not believe myself. I cleared my throat. At least, I do not think so. Lucas studied my face with thoughtful gray eyes, not in an uncomfortable way, but like someone trying to remember the ending of a story he had almost forgotten. That is strange, he admitted. I know we have never spoken, yet when I woke up this morning, I was absolutely certain I needed to come to this bridge. A chilly breeze drifted through the crystal trees, scattering tiny silver petals across the water. My heartbeat quietly accelerated. The original novel never mentioned dreams, strange instincts, or heroes wandering around campus searching for supporting characters. Something had already begun changing. Before I could invent another excuse, a loud voice echoed from the opposite side of the garden. "Lucas, there you are." Another young man jogged toward us, carrying a leather satchel filled with herbs and neatly wrapped bandages. His warm amber eyes immediately landed on me before his smile unexpectedly softened. "Ethan Brooks, the Academy's most gifted healer." "Oh," Ethan said almost under his breath. So it really was him. I stared. Lucas stared. Ethan looked equally confused by his own words. "What do you mean?" Lucas asked. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck with an embarrassed smile. "I honestly do not know. Last night I had the strangest dream." His expression turned thoughtful. Someone kept standing beneath a crystal tree beside a stream, smiling at me even though I could never see his face clearly. His gaze settled on mine again. "When I walked into the garden just now, I realized it was you." My survival plan officially entered critical condition. First, Lucas mysteriously searched for me. Now Ethan dreamed about me before we had ever met. Somewhere in the distance, the Academy bells rang once more, softer this time, almost like an echo instead of a warning. None of us spoke. The peaceful garden suddenly felt much smaller than before. I glanced toward the nearest pathway, silently calculating how quickly I could escape without looking suspicious. Probably not very quickly. Lucas noticed the direction of my eyes and smiled again, though this time there was a hint of concern hidden behind the warmth. "You are thinking about leaving," he said gently. I blinked. Was it that obvious? "Only because," Lucas replied with a quiet honesty that caught me completely off guard. "I had the strange feeling that if I let you walk away today, I would spend a very long time regretting it, even though I cannot explain why." For the first time since waking inside this world, I realized that avoiding the heroes and escaping destiny were two completely different challenges. One depended on my choices. The other apparently ignored them. Lucas's quiet confession lingered in the air between us, while Ethan watched both of us with the same puzzled expression I imagined was mirrored on my own face. None of this belonged in the original story. The garden was supposed to be peaceful. Orientation day was supposed to be ordinary. Instead, it already felt as though invisible threads were pulling every important person in the Academy toward me one careful step at a time. "I promise I am not nearly as interesting as you both seem to think," I said with a nervous laugh. "Most of my talents involve finishing homework on time and making average tea." Ethan smiled warmly. "Average tea is still better than the tea they serve in the infirmary." Lucas actually laughed, and the sound surprised all three of us. It was light, genuine, and completely unlike the distant hero described in the novel. For one brief moment, the strange tension faded, replaced by something unexpectedly comfortable. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me uneasy. Heroes were not supposed to become comfortable around Noah Carter. Before I could find a polite excuse to leave, another Academy bell echoed across the campus. This time the sound was softer, followed by a shimmering ripple passing through the crystal trees. Tiny silver leaves drifted downward, glowing faintly before dissolving into sparkling light above the stream. Students throughout the gardens stopped walking to admire the beautiful sight. Ethan looked upward with quiet wonder. "Have you ever seen the trees react like this during orientation?" Lucas slowly shook his head. "Never." I had not either. In the novel, the crystal trees only responded to unusually strong magical resonance, and even then it happened once every several years. The timing could not be a coincidence. A cool breeze brushed past us, carrying the scent of old paper instead of flowers. My heart skipped. That smell did not belong in the gardens. It belonged in the oldest corner of Evercrest Academy, the library. More specifically, the forgotten archive hidden beneath it. I stared toward the distant stone tower rising above the rooftops. Somewhere inside, a certain ancient book was supposed to remain sealed until much later in the story. Yet the strange breeze felt almost like an invitation. "Noah," Ethan asked gently, "are you all right?" I realized I had been staring into the distance without speaking. "I was just thinking," I answered honestly. "About books." Ethan blinked. "Books?" "It is a long story." Lucas followed my gaze toward the library tower. "You are planning to go there." I sighed. Apparently my face had become a public announcement board for every private thought I ever had. "Maybe." Lucas looked thoughtful for a moment before giving a small nod. Then I will walk with you. That is really not necessary. I know. I prefer walking alone. I know that too. His calm answers somehow made refusing him even harder. Before I could think of another excuse, footsteps approached along the stone path behind us. A tall young man carrying a rolled parchment and several astronomy charts slowed to a stop as soon as his eyes met mine. Damien Cole. He frowned slightly, as though trying to remember a name resting just beyond reach. After several quiet seconds, he spoke with complete sincerity. Forgive me if this sounds strange, but did we already become friends in a dream that I forgot after waking up? The breeze stopped. The crystal leaves hung perfectly still in the air. Deep inside the academy, hidden far beyond anyone's sight, an ancient book quietly turned its first page by itself. Damien's question settled over the garden with the quiet weight of something that should have been impossible. I looked from his curious expression to Lucas's thoughtful gaze and Ethan's gentle concern, then briefly considered whether pretending to be someone else might still work. Unfortunately, 3 different heroes had already memorized my face in less than an hour, so changing my name now felt a little optimistic. I do not think we have ever met, I answered carefully. At least not in this lifetime. The words escaped before I realized how strange they sounded. Damien blinked once. Lucas tilted his head slightly. Ethan looked as though he wanted to ask another question, but politely decided against it. I cleared my throat. I meant, since arriving at the academy. Wonderful. My ability to sound normal had apparently taken the day off. To my surprise, Damien smiled instead of looking suspicious. That makes more sense, he said, although judging by his expression, it clearly did not. He adjusted the rolled star charts beneath one arm and glanced toward the library tower rising beyond the gardens. I was actually heading to the archives. Professor Alden asked me to return several celestial records. My heart quietly stopped cooperating. The forgotten archive. The strange breeze. The ancient book. Every clue seemed determined to point in exactly the same direction. What a coincidence, Ethan said warmly. We were just discussing the library. I silently glared at Destiny. Destiny, as usual, ignored me. Then we should walk together, Lucas suggested. 4 pairs of eyes immediately turned toward me. Apparently my opinion had somehow become important despite the fact that I had spent the entire morning trying not to exist. I forced the brightest smile I could manage. Actually, I just remembered something extremely urgent. Lucas looked concerned. What happened? I think, Noah. Think. Need to organize my socks. Silence. Even the birds seemed embarrassed for me. Damien politely looked away to hide a laugh. Ethan covered his mouth, though the smile reached his eyes anyway. Lucas remained perfectly serious for 3 long seconds before the corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly. Your socks can probably wait 20 minutes, he said gently. I sighed with the quiet dignity of a man who knew he had completely lost the argument. They probably can. We crossed the academy grounds together beneath rows of crystal trees, the conversation drifting naturally between classes, professors, and orientation schedules. To my surprise, nobody questioned me about strange dreams or mysterious feelings anymore. Instead, they treated me as though I had always belonged beside them. It should have felt comforting. Instead, every easy laugh and casual smile made my chest feel unexpectedly heavy. These moments were never supposed to happen. According to the novel, Lucas should have been meeting the heroine today. Ethan should have been preparing for his first healing examination. Damien should have been alone in the observatory. Their stories were quietly bending around mine, and I had no idea how to stop it. As we approached the enormous library doors, the warm afternoon sunlight suddenly dimmed beneath passing clouds. The carved silver runes surrounding the entrance shimmered softly before fading again. None of the others seemed to notice. I did. The same scent of old parchment drifted through the air once more, stronger now, almost inviting. Hidden beneath it was another faint fragrance, like rain falling across ancient stone. Something inside the library had awakened. Before anyone could reach the entrance, a quiet voice echoed from the top of the marble staircase. So you finally came. We all looked up at the same time. Standing beside the towering wooden doors was a young man dressed in the dark blue robes reserved for advanced scholars. A thick spell book floated calmly beside his shoulder as bright silver eyes rested directly on me. Julian Hayes smiled with unmistakable recognition, as though this meeting had been expected long before any of us had arrived. And with complete certainty, he said, "Welcome back, Noah. I have been waiting for you." Julian Hayes spoke my name with such calm certainty that the world seemed to pause around us. Nobody reacted. Immediately, even the breeze that had followed us across the academy grounds disappeared into complete silence. I looked at Julian, then at Lucas, Ethan, and Damien. Judging from their expressions, they were just as confused as I was. That was comforting for approximately half a second. "I think," I said carefully, "there is a very good chance you have mistaken me for someone else." Julian smiled with surprising patience, as though he had expected exactly that response. "I hoped I had," he admitted. "It would have made everything much simpler." He stepped down one marble stair, the ancient spell book floating quietly beside him. Unlike the others, he did not look as though he had recognized me from a dream. He looked like someone who had been waiting for a promise to finally come true. "We have never met," I insisted. "Not in this life," Julian replied softly. The sentence sent an uncomfortable chill through the afternoon air. Lucas folded his arms thoughtfully. "You have been having strange dreams too?" Julian nodded once. "Dreams. Fragments. Conversations that disappear when I wake. Every memory ends the same way." His silver eyes rested on me again. "Someone walks away, and I cannot stop them." Ethan lowered his voice. "Mine always begin with Noah smiling." Damien looked down at the rolled charts in his hands. "Mine end with an empty observatory." Lucas remained silent for several moments before quietly adding, "Mine end with regret." Nobody laughed. Nobody tried to explain the impossible. The four of them had arrived at the same destination by different paths, and somehow every path had led to me. I wished I understood why. Julian finally turned toward the towering library doors. "Come inside," he said. "There is something you should see." Every reasonable survival instinct told me to refuse. Ancient libraries never contained ordinary answers. They contained cursed books, forgotten prophecies, mysterious guardians, and people making terrible life decisions. Unfortunately, curiosity had defeated common sense many years ago. "Fine," I sighed. "But if anything starts glowing ominously, I reserve the right to panic." Damien smiled. Ethan quietly laughed. "Even?" Lucas looked faintly amused. Julian simply nodded as though my condition sounded perfectly reasonable. The enormous wooden doors opened without anyone touching them. Warm golden light spilled across polished stone floors lined with endless shelves stretching toward an impossibly high ceiling, painted with constellations that slowly moved across the sky above. Floating lanterns drifted peacefully between the aisles while hundreds of books hovered gently in the air before settling onto waiting shelves. The entire library felt alive, but not frightening. It felt expectant. Students moved quietly through the reading halls, completely unaware that anything unusual was happening. Julian led us deeper into the oldest wing until we reached a circular chamber hidden behind towering shelves. At the center stood a single white pedestal. Resting upon it was an ancient book bound in pale silver leather with no title on the cover. The moment I stepped into the room, the entire library fell silent. Every floating lantern stopped moving. Every drifting page froze in midair. Slowly, almost gently, the ancient book opened by itself. Blank pages turned one after another until brilliant silver words began writing themselves across the paper without a single hand touching the ink. Only one sentence appeared, shining brightly beneath the quiet light. "Welcome home, Anchor." The four heroes stared at the glowing pages in complete disbelief, but when I looked at their faces, I realized something even stranger. None of them could actually see the words. They were all looking at me instead. The silence inside the hidden chamber felt different from ordinary silence. It was not empty. It was listening. I looked back at the ancient book, expecting the glowing sentence to disappear the moment I blinked, but the silver letters remained perfectly clear. "Welcome home, Anchor." My throat suddenly felt dry. Very slowly, I glanced at the others. Lucas studied my face with quiet concern. Ethan looked from me to the blank pages and back again, clearly confused. Damien frowned, as though trying to solve an impossible equation. Julian alone seemed calm, though even he looked uncertain about what the book had actually revealed. "What is it saying?" Ethan finally asked. I stared at him. "You cannot see it." Ethan shook his head. "The pages are empty." My heartbeat stumbled. Lucas stepped closer to the pedestal and narrowed his gray eyes. I only see blank paper. Damien gently reached toward the book before stopping a few inches away. There is powerful magic here, he murmured. But whatever it is not revealing itself to us. Julian slowly exhaled. Then it chose its reader. I would have preferred being chosen by something less mysterious. A scholarship. A bakery. Maybe a cat. Ancient magical books rarely brought good news. The silver letters shimmered once before another sentence slowly appeared beneath the first. The story remembers every ending, even the ones forgotten by the world. My chest tightened. Forgotten endings. Funeral bells. A photograph that rewrote itself. Dreams shared by 4 heroes. None of those pieces fit together yet, but they were beginning to point toward the same invisible picture. Before I could read further, another line formed across the page. Return before the second sunset. Come alone. Do not speak the truth before they remember it themselves. The final sentence faded almost immediately, leaving only empty parchment once again. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. I officially miss having ordinary problems, I whispered. I would happily trade mysterious prophecies for overdue homework. Damien quietly laughed. That sounds oddly specific. You have no idea. Lucas watched me carefully. The book spoke to you. It was not a question. I considered lying. Unfortunately, everyone in the room had already become unusually good at noticing when something was wrong. It showed me something, I admitted. Nothing that makes sense yet. That was technically true, which made it my favorite kind of answer. Julian nodded thoughtfully instead of pressing further. Then do not force yourself to understand it today. Ancient magic reveals itself in layers. Ethan smiled with quiet reassurance. You do not have to solve everything alone. The words landed more deeply than he probably intended. For just a moment, I forgot these 4. People were supposed to be distant heroes whose lives barely touched mine in the original story. Standing together inside the peaceful library, they simply felt like people who genuinely did not want me to carry confusion by myself. That thought was unexpectedly comforting. It was also terrifying, because comfort led to trust, and trust led to attachment, and attachment had ended very badly for Noah Carter in every version of the story I remembered. A soft breeze drifted through the chamber, although there were no windows nearby. Every floating lantern gently swayed at the same time. Somewhere beyond the hidden room, the academy clock rang once, marking the late afternoon. Julian quietly looked toward the entrance. We should leave before the archive closes. None of us argued. As we stepped out of the circular chamber, I glanced back one final time. The ancient book had already closed itself, resting peacefully upon the white pedestal as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet just before the heavy stone doorway sealed behind us, I caught one final glimpse of silver writing appearing across its cover. This time there were only 3 words, and somehow they frightened me even more than everything I had read before. He remembers first. The 3 words stayed with me all the way out of the archive. He remembers first. I repeated them silently as we walked through the endless library corridors lined with floating lanterns and towering shelves. Every few steps, I found myself glancing sideways at Lucas without meaning to. It was ridiculous. The book had not even mentioned a name, yet some quiet instinct insisted the message belonged to him. That was exactly the sort of assumption people made shortly before ancient magic embarrassed them in public. You have been looking at me for the past 5 minutes, Lucas said gently as we reached the main reading hall. I nearly tripped over my own feet. I have not. Ethan smiled into the cup of tea he had somehow acquired despite nobody stopping anywhere. Damien looked suspiciously amused. Julian pretended to continue reading a floating scroll, although I was almost certain he was listening. Lucas folded his arms with remarkable patience. You just did it again. I sighed dramatically. Fine. I was thinking. About me? Unfortunately, yes. That answer earned me 4 very different reactions. Ethan looked curious. Damien smiled openly. Julian quietly lowered his scroll. Lucas simply waited. I cannot explain it, I admitted. I just have the strange feeling that something important is about to happen. Lucas nodded slowly. I have been feeling the same way all day. Before anyone could continue the conversation, every enchanted lantern throughout the library flickered at once. The warm golden light dimmed into pale silver for only a second before returning to normal. Students around us barely noticed, but every one of us stopped walking. Ethan looked toward the ceiling. Did you feel that? Damien answered first, like someone opened a door. Julian closed his floating scroll immediately. No. His expression grew unexpectedly serious, like someone remembered something. The words settled heavily between us. At that exact moment, Lucas lifted one hand to his forehead, his calm expression briefly breaking for the first time since we had met. Lucas, Ethan asked, are you all right? Lucas closed his eyes. He took a slow breath. I suddenly remembered standing in this library before. Damien looked around in confusion. We are standing in this library now. Not today. Lucas slowly lowered his hand. Another time. His voice became quieter with every word. The shelves were damaged. The windows were broken. It was raining inside. My pulse quickened. That scene did not belong to the current timeline. Lucas frowned slightly as if trying to hold onto a fading dream. Someone was walking away from me. He looked directly at me without realizing he had done it. I kept calling his name. Nobody spoke. Even the distant whispers of students seemed to disappear beneath the weight of those words. Lucas blinked once, and whatever memory had surfaced seemed to slip away again. I am sorry, he said softly. It is gone now. Ethan rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Damien quietly looked toward Julian. Julian, however, was watching me instead. There was no accusation in his eyes, only quiet understanding. I knew exactly what he was thinking because I had begun thinking the same thing myself. The ancient book had been right. Someone had started remembering before everyone else. The hidden message had never been a warning about the future. It had been describing something already happening. As we stepped outside the library, the evening sky glowed with soft shades of gold and violet. Students laughed across the courtyard, completely unaware that reality itself seemed to be shifting one memory at a time. High above Evercrest Academy, where no ordinary student bothered to look, one small silver star suddenly appeared long before nightfall, shining alone against the bright afternoon sky as though it had arrived hours too early, and for reasons I could not explain, every instinct inside me whispered that it had come to watch us. The silver star remained visible long after the sun should have hidden it. Students crossed the academy courtyard without noticing anything unusual, laughing with friends, and hurrying toward evening classes, while I stood perfectly still beneath the white marble arches of Evercrest Academy. Somehow that lonely star felt less like part of the sky and more like an eye quietly watching every decision I made. Noah. Lucas's voice gently pulled me back to the present. I turned toward him, forcing a smile that probably convinced nobody. Sorry, I admitted. I was distracted. Lucas studied my face for a moment before speaking. You keep looking at the sky as though you expect it to answer a question. I laughed softly. If it does, I hope it uses smaller words. Today has already been complicated enough. Ethan smiled warmly, while Damien shook his head with amused disbelief. Julian remained unusually quiet, his thoughtful gaze moving between the silver star overhead and my expression as though comparing two pieces of the same puzzle. We continued walking through the academy gardens until we reached the central fountain where crystal water shimmered beneath the fading afternoon light. The peaceful sound of flowing water settled everyone's thoughts for a few precious moments. I realized this was the first calm silence I had experienced all day, and strangely enough, I did not want it to end. Can I ask all of you something? I finally said. For pairs of eyes immediately turned toward me. If someone you had never met suddenly felt familiar, what would you do? Damien answered first. I would assume we met somewhere I forgot. Ethan smiled thoughtfully. I would try getting to know them instead of worrying about why they felt familiar. Julian folded his hands behind his back. I would search for the truth until the feeling made sense. Lucas remained silent the longest. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost impossibly gentle. I would stay beside them until they no longer had to face the mystery alone. His answer settled quietly inside my heart before I could stop it. None of them knew how much those simple words meant. None of them remembered enough to understand why I had spent the entire day trying to avoid exactly this kind of connection. Yet somehow they continued, choosing kindness over suspicion, patience over fear. I lowered my eyes toward the rippling fountain, wondering whether destiny had always been less frightening than loneliness. At that exact moment, the water surface shimmered unnaturally. Instead of reflecting the evening sky, it reflected a different scene entirely. I saw the same courtyard beneath heavy gray clouds. The fountain was cracked. The marble paths were empty. Lucas stood several yards away wearing the same academy uniform, but his expression carried an unmistakable sadness I had never seen before. He looked directly toward the place where I was standing now and quietly whispered one sentence. "This time, please do not disappear." The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Crystal water flowed peacefully once again. Nobody else seemed to have noticed anything unusual. My breathing became unsteady. Lucas looked at me with immediate concern. "Noah." Before I could answer, every academy bell began ringing together across the campus. Students stopped walking. Professors looked toward the heavens. High above Evercrest Academy, the single silver star expanded into a circle of brilliant light, and elegant silver words slowly appeared across the evening sky where everyone could finally see them. "The story has begun again." While gasps echoed across the academy grounds, one final line formed beneath it, visible only to me. "Protect the first hero, or every future will end the same way."